Here is a second video for multiplying complex numbers. The red example, we are just going to multiply these two complex numbers, which are actually both binomials, so we're going to FOIL. First times our first will be 2 times 8. 2 times 2i will be plus 4i. Negative 5i times 8 is minus 40i. And lastly, we'll have negative 5i times 2i, which is minus 10i squared. Combining like terms in the next line, we'll have 16, and then positive 4i and negative 40i is minus 36i. Remember, I squared is negative 1, so really what that does here is change the sign. So instead of a negative 10i squared, we'll have just plus 10, since that I squared is times negative 1. Then we can last combine our real parts, our real terms. 16 and 10 is 26 minus 36i. There's our final complex number, both a real and imaginary part. In the second example, we're doing the exact same thing. The negative 7, or the square root of negative 7 is the imaginary part for each. So we're going to multiply our first, and we'll get 2 times 10, which is 20. And then once we do our outside multiplication, the 2 times the square root of negative 7, that square root of negative 7, as we said, is imaginary. So I'm going to write it that way. I'm going to write plus 2, and then break apart square root of negative 7 like this. I'm going to do the same thing when we multiply our inside terms. So just rewriting the square root of negative 7 as I square root 7. Last times our last. Let's think about this down here at the bottom. If we're doing square root of negative 7 times the square root of negative 7, well, each one of those is this, where I times I is I squared. And the square root of 7 times the square root of 7 is the square root of 49, which is just 7. And then I squared is negative 1, so it's 7 times negative 1, or negative 7. So that's what we have as our final term there. Combining our real parts, we'll get a 13. And combining our imaginary parts, we have 2i square root 7 plus 10i square root 7, which will give us 12i square root 7. These two problems are very similar. One just involves radicals from the beginning and one doesn't. They're all done using the FOIL method, or just multiplying, to explain it simply. And if there's something that you don't know, rewrite it like we did. It helps, especially when you have a lot of the I squareds, negative ones, and different signs. So things can get a little bit confusing, but remember, it's just the same process.